See. Hey everyone, welcome to the Ananda podcast. Dylan here. I am here once again with my friend Kim Michaels. Really excited to have you here, Kim. If you didn't listen to the last podcast, please go and listen to it. It was amazing. Got so much great feedback. Kim is an author, a spiritual author, and one of my favorite people to personally go to for spiritual advice and help and inspiration. He's written over how many books now? 80 books,
Yeah,
right? Something like that. You do
yeah, but who's
conferences.
counting?
Yeah. I'm on one and it was a little poetry book, so I don't know how you've done 80, but and you do conferences all across the world. I actually just attended your conference in Chicago and it was amazing. Just 3 days of inspiration and learning. So I'm just excited to have you on. So thank you for coming on,
Yeah,
Kim.
well, thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to come on and talk about today, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of things that aren't planned, but there's a lot of things going on in the world. There is a tremendous amount of upheaval. I mean, not just the past couple of months, but over the past few years, kind of ever since 2020 hit, it was just one thing after another, it seems.
Hmm.
And I think that sort of an initiation that everybody is collectively facing right now is how to cultivate inner peace. It's something I've certainly had to look at and deal with and am still working on. But I'd love to hear about your own journey of cultivating inner peace and how you can navigate these crazy things that are happening in our world and how to really do that.
Yeah, boy, that's a big topic. I mean,
Yeah, I
it's
know. I feel like we'll be
because
here for a while.
the journey took a while.
Yeah.
People are you can divide spiritual people into two categories: those who are looking for a quick fix, and those who have realized that the path is a lifetime commitment. So for me, I didn't cultivate inner peace in 5 minutes or 5 years. It took longer than that. But a lot of, if I was to say one thing that meant more to me than anything else, it was really contemplating and understanding free will. And that the whole purpose of life from a spiritual perspective is our growth. And that means individually and collectively.
Mm.
So humankind is growing collectively. And you can see that when you look back. You can see we are in a better place today than we were 1,000 years ago in the Dark Ages. And even though there's a lot of turmoil in the world, there is still progress. That is how I see it.
Mm.
But free will is the ultimate law of the universe, because people only grow by making choices and seeing the consequences. I know there are a lot of people who haven't realized that. And that's why if you look at the world, you can see two categories of people: those who haven't taken responsibility for their own choices,
Mm.
and those who have started to.
Yeah.
And most of those who have started to are spiritual people.
Yeah.
But many people out there in the world, they haven't taken responsibility. And that's why essentially they want somebody else to make decisions for them.
Mm.
And that's what you see happening in dictatorships, totalitarian nations. The people there, they don't want to take responsibility, so they want some strongman to come in and solve all their problems.
Mm. What do you say to
But
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask. I hear a lot of people who are they're looking at the current situation on Earth, and their immediate reaction is thinking that we're going downhill. But one thing I've heard you mention a number of times is that it's actually the increase of light that's kind of shedding sh more awareness on things that have kind of existed, or even increasing the seeming polarity between good and bad, that sort of stuff. Is that accurate as to how you see the situation?
Yeah, if you think about it, you go out when it's still dark, completely dark in the morning.
Hmm.
You can't see anything.
Yeah.
That's the dark ages, right? So then you have a period where the light gradually increases. And now you're beginning to see certain things, but you can't really see what's there. Uh, so it's difficult to know what's hiding in the shadows. But then the sun comes up, and now for a period of time, you have this very stark contrast between areas where the sun shines on it and areas that are still in the shadows. And that's where we are right now, collectively on planet Earth. the light has been increased to a point where the sun has come up, and the reason the light has increased is so many spiritual people over the last, I would say, 6-7 decades have worked on raising their consciousness, doing spiritual practices, studying spiritual teachings. I'm not talking about just one movement. I'm talking about all of the people or many different movements who have attempted to raise their consciousness by healing their psychology. So the light has increased so that the contrast is stronger. And in the future, hopefully not the too distant future, the sun will come fully up, and now there will be a much more clarity. It'll be easier to see. But you still have now these areas that are in deep shadow, and people who are in those deep shadows, they can't see clearly.
Right.
And those who can see, they also see the contrast between the light and the darkness more clearly. And therefore it can seem like things are getting worse.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that, as the light increases, people are challenged by the light. Will they hold on to the old, or will they flow with the new?
Yeah.
Will they flow with the changes? And those who are holding on to the old, they have to hold on tighter and tighter, which means they become more extreme, more unbalanced. And that's what you see in a lot of people. It's like you say 2020, and you could start there. You could also go 10 years back and say people have become more extreme. You see it online, you see it on people's comments, you see it in what people believe in. I mean, 10 years ago, not that many people believed in conspiracy theories. But now a lot of people do. I remember 20 years ago, I came across the Flat Earth Society. And back then it was a joke, right? But today they estimate 2% of the American people believe in it.
No way. Really?
Yeah, this is what they estimate.
How many millions of people is that? That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's 6-7 million people who believe the Earth is flat, and we've all been fooled into thinking it's round.
Oh, gosh.
And NASA has spent billions of dollars trying to make us believe the Earth is round, and nobody asks why. What's the payoff? Why would they do it? Why do they want us to think the Earth is round if it really is flat?
Oh, my Lord. Yeah.
So I'm just saying, you can see it in many other things, including the recent US election, how people believe in these things that are just contrary to fact.
Yeah. And I'm noticing, what I'm noticing more and more is that people, especially with the US election, I've noticed no matter what side people say they're on, they're getting so worked up, and there's so much anger, so much vitriol, so much black and white thinking. I think that's something that really that's the foundation of what's happening right now in a lot of ways, is people are playing out the black and white thinking. And I know that's something that you've talked a lot about, and I've noticed for myself, I used to be, when I was a kid, I was very neutral, and I never really got pulled into black and white thinking. And then I'd say, right around 2015, 2016, it started to become a little bit more. And then around the COVID situation, I was really pulled into black and white thinking. And I was managed to pull myself out of it. And it was a huge relief. But since I've in many ways overcome that, I look at people who are still stuck no matter what political side or no matter where their perception filter is. And it just seems so nonsensical. And I'm curious if you could talk a bit more about the black and white thinking, because that's what I really see a lot of right now.
Well, black and white thinking is an outcome of what I call the duality consciousness. So if you, in the duality consciousness, there's always two opposite polarities. And one is absolutely right and one is absolutely wrong. A typical example from our part of the world, Christianity is the only true religion. All other religions are of the devil. That's black and white thinking. But it's also black and white thinking to say one side of the political spectrum in the United States is absolutely right about everything, and the other side is absolutely wrong about everything. it's black and white, whatever side you're on.
Yeah.
Uh, and when you get out of black and white thinking, when you start getting out of it, there's a couple of things you realize. You realize that what black and white thinking does is it blinds you to any other options than those two opposites.
Mm-hmm.
You're only thinking about opposites. So you're not thinking, could there be a different way? Could there be a better way than those two? I actually learned when I was in school, which is quite a number of years ago, that there was a principle that you can define the terms of the debate.
Mm.
And if you define the terms of the debate based on black and white thinking, the entire debate revolves around this is completely right, this is completely wrong. And the other side says, no, you're completely wrong, our side is completely right. But that means any other option is left out of the debate. Yeah. People simply don't see it. So that's what I mean with the contrast has become stronger now between the areas that are lighted up and the areas that are still in the shadows, because people think it's either this or that. But in reality, when you start looking beyond this, you see that there are other options, and there are options that are not based on this polarized view. So there are options that are more balanced. Mm. And just to give you an example, when I grew up, it was during the Cold War. So the debate was, we have two economic systems, capitalism and communism. But are those really the only two? Is this the only kind of economy you can have? Many of the democracies have found a middle way. They are not communist at all, but they are not strictly capitalist either, because the state plays a role in saying we have to treat our citizens in a reasonable way, and we can't just let companies do whatever they want to make the biggest profit, pay workers as little as possible, and this and that. Yeah. So there is more than one middle way. There are many ways in between those two extremes, and it's the same with everything.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things that I've really noticed is that right now it's so easy to get pulled into the collective emotional vortices. I think that there's this concept of the collective consciousness. If you're listening and you're not familiar with it, we're all connected. Everything in this universe is connected, and everyone who calls the earth home is tied into this collective energy field. And so that means that our emotions, our thoughts, our sense of identity, it's tied in together, and you can detach yourself from the collective consciousness, but the vast majority of people are still connected to it. And I think that those who are more sensitive, more intuitive, they can obviously feel the increasing pressure and the increasing turmoil. But it's become really, really difficult to ignore any imbalances in your own emotional body, because the collective is just so intense, is so tumultuous, that it's so easy to get pulled into things. There's the what is it, the term, I'm triggered. This triggers me.
It pushes your buttons.
Yeah, people are getting, people getting triggered. It seems like it's happening. It's easier and easier to trigger people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I part of that, I would say, is because of this increased emotional vortex, this energy that's pulling on people's emotions constantly. But that's something I noticed with the election. I noticed that people are just having these incredibly intense emotional reactions, and I've felt some pulls in different directions, but I sort of detached myself from it, and I'm sort of just in this place where I'm just open to see what happens, right? I'm not really judging anybody in the situation. I'm not really creating a value judgment. Oh, this is going to be the worst thing that's ever happened for America. This is going to be the best thing that's ever happened. I'm sort of in this place where it's like, well, let's just see what happens, because I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know. I don't feel, maybe I see some imbalances here. I can intuitively sense some things when I listen to this person speak or that person speak. But at the end of the day, I feel like if you're listening to this and you're a spiritual person, one of the best things that we can do is hold a balance. We can be peace. We can, hold that space within ourselves. I don't know if you have anything to add on to that or comment or.
Yeah, what I realized many years ago after I found the spiritual path was that, exactly as you're saying, there is the collective consciousness. And you can look at it as an as an energy field that we have created collectively. So most spiritual people are open to the fact we have an energy field around our physical bodies. And likewise, there's an energy field around the planet that we have created collectively. So what we were never brought up to understand is that that collective consciousness is constantly pulling on our individual energy field. And it's pulling us to go into this direction or that direction. And there's not just one pull, there are opposite pulls. And of course, as there is more turmoil, as there has been since COVID especially, there's more of a pull, it's more of an intense pull. And so it's kind of, to me, it's exactly the same as 200 years ago, people didn't know about bacteria. So if they drank water with cholera bacteria, they would get sick and die. Simple thing. If they just knew that there's something called bacteria and they can detect it in the water, they can cleanse the water. Today, we don't know that there are these energies in the collective consciousness, even though we claim to be so scientifically sophisticated. I actually believe science could detect this if they developed instruments to do it, but that's besides the point. So as spiritual people, we need to realize there is this collective consciousness that's pulling on us. And the way I personally look at it is that if I feel I have a strong reaction to anything, an unbalanced reaction, I realize that it's because there's a pull. But then what I always do is I say, well, I do two things. I say, first of all, my goal as a spiritual person is to be balanced, to be neutral. And I know that will sound strange to some people, but if you really think about it, what's the essence of spirituality? It is nothing in this world defines me. I'm a spiritual being. I have my origin in a higher realm than this material world. So nothing defines me. Does my physical body, my nationality, my family, my sex, my political opinions, do they define me? Or is there more to me than all of these outer things? And I think the essence of the spiritual path is you come to realize there is more to you. There's a core of your being that isn't defined by these outer things. So for me, the goal of the spiritual path is connect to that. I call it your higher self or your I am presence. You connect to that core of your being, and you seek to increase that connection until you attain more and more oneness with that core of your being. And because that being is beyond this world, it isn't in black and white thinking, and it can't be pulled into these extremes. So that's why, so this is the one thing I always realize my goal is to be balanced. But the other thing is, if I feel a pull on me, I realize somebody can only push my buttons if I have buttons to push. And that means I have something in my psychology, I call it subconscious selves, that it's a reactionary pattern, basically. And, you know, I realized many years ago that the goal of spiritual growth is to come to a point where you don't have any buttons that people in the world can use to pull on you. I can't remember if we last time talked about Gautama Buddha, but his final initiation was he was ready to go into nirvana, but he had one final initiation. He was sitting under a tree meditating, and the demons of Mara, which is seen as the forces of this world, were trying to pull him into reacting to them. And it was like he had to look at the world and he had to say, is there anything here in the world that pulls me? Something I feel I haven't done, something I feel I have to do or I have to react to. And only when he had demonstrated that he had no reaction to this could he go into nirvana. And Jesus said the same thing. He said, the prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. So for many years, this has been my goal of spiritual growth, to come to a point, nothing in the world can determine my reaction, my state of mind, because I am, as a spiritual being, independent of the world. It doesn't mean I'm not in the world. As this saying in the New Testament, you're in the world, but not of the world. And so to me, that's the goal. And when you understand that, then you get a different perspective where you can say, okay, I see that I'm being pulled. Why? Let me look at myself, because my goal is to overcome all of these things that the collective consciousness can reach into my personal energy field and pull on me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a turning point for me, it's happened more recently where I've reframed it. And I used to think I wish all of these things would change so I didn't feel this way. And
Yeah,
now it's more I want what why I want to not be compelled to react if things change. I don't want to be compelled to react based upon these outer circumstances. I'm tired of being a slave to outer circumstances and outer situations. And I think that's really the core of cultivating peace, is that we're sort of, as in this human consciousness, it almost seems like we're being constantly compelled to react to things in this world. And I think that's the central human dilemma and enigma, is how do we break free from that? Because everybody thinks, oh, if I just had perfect outer conditions, then I would feel amazing. Life would be perfect. I've had situations in my life where everything seems to be exactly the way I want it to be. I've got the partner, I've got the kids, I've got the money, I've got the business, I've got the house, I got the travel, all the things. And yet I was still miserable. And in situations like that, I really thought to myself, there's obviously something more here, because I have all the things my outer self says that I want, and yet I still feel exactly the same, if not worse, because I'm realizing that none of this actually filled what I wanted it to fill. And so I see that really the journey as spiritual people is to just find a way to remove this cause, to rise above cause and effect, to rise above this, all of these poles that we have within ourselves, to react to the things of this world, and instead just be free no matter what happens. And that is, I think that's what most of us truly desire, is to, be able to choose who we are in every moment. But we're not really conscious of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I started out saying there are two kinds of people: those who are taking responsibility for themselves and those who haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And those who haven't taken responsibility for themselves, they might say, oh, I want peace of mind. But the only way they can see it is, but outer conditions have to change. And when outer conditions are just right, then I'll be at peace. As a person who takes responsibility for yourself, you look at the world and you say, how likely is it that this planet is going to become paradise in my lifetime? So if I want to have peace of mind, am I going to wait for outer conditions to magically snap into place? Or am I going to say, maybe peace of mind is a state of mind that takes place inside myself instead of outside myself? Mm-hmm. And that means that the factor that determines whether I have peace of mind is not out there. It's in here. It's in my mind, because I have these buttons. I have these subconscious cells, these reactionary patterns. So let me look at that. And this, by the way, this is not just me saying this. This is what every spiritual teacher has been saying going back thousands of years. That you need to change your mind, not the outer conditions.
Mm-hmm. So how do people do that? If someone's listening to this and maybe they've read some spiritual books, they think that maybe spirituality is gaining enlightenment or nirvana, or maybe having spiritual experiences. This might be something that's very different from what they're used to hearing. Separate selves. What's a separate self? How do I remove these buttons? It's sort of enigmatic. And I was brought up my mom was a little bit new age, so I read a lot of new age books when I was younger. And when I started listening to your teachings about resolving psychology, it was sort of enigmatic, and it was also sort of disappointing, because I liked when I was 15 years old, I liked, I wanted the very high spiritual experiences. I wanted to, go out of the body. I wanted to go do all, experience with the fluff, right? And I didn't want to grovel in my psychology. I didn't want to have to resolve those things. I didn't want to take responsibility. And actually, for the first probably 10 years of being on the path, I just sort of ignored that aspect. So how do you even get started with resolving psychology to cultivate more inner peace?
Well, you could say, in your case, the first 10 years, did you get peace of mind after 10 years of doing all this outer stuff?
No, less peace of mind.
Okay, so the question is, do you want peace of mind or don't you?
Right.
if you see the way I look at it again, free will is everything. Yeah. And I have over the years, I've been on the spiritual path for 48 years. And I've seen many, many people who they come in because they're interested in these outer things. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I just see it that ideally this should be a phase. It's like what I call the honeymoon phase. You discover the spiritual path, you realize there's so much more to know than what you were brought up with. So you want to explore it all. But there should come a point where now you begin to ask yourself, what do I really want out of the spiritual path? And if you still want all these experiences, like, some people talk about peak experiences, and they're always chasing these peak experiences. And if that's what they want, that's fine. This is what I call the outer path. But there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, what do I really want? And if I, for example, want peace of mind, you have to realize that peace of mind is something that happens inside your mind. And it can only happen if you're independent of outer conditions, because, as I said, the planet isn't going to be peaceful in the next couple of years. So that's when you discover that there is an inner path behind the outer path. And that is the path of changing your psychology. Mm-hmm. And the simplest way to explain it, I think, is, as I said, you want to get to a point where there's nothing outside of yourself that can pull on you, that forces you into a reaction. So you look at your reactionary patterns. Why do you get irritated in certain situations? And then, there are methods out there. I mean, I have many on my website. I have many on my YouTube channel. We'll talk about overcoming these subconscious selves. But there are many others that talk about it. Because when you look at it, you can see that there are many spiritual teachers and teachings and organizations out there who are talking about the inner path. They may be using different words and concepts that I am, but they're talking about it. So you need to find something that appeals to you. But the essence of this is a change in your consciousness, a change in your psychology. Mm-hmm. You need to come to see something you're not seeing right now. Yeah. So, for example, why do I get irritated? Well, it's most likely because in certain situations, you have what I call a subconscious self that's based on this standard. Certain things should happen, certain things shouldn't happen. Like the US election. This person should be the next president, this person shouldn't be. So you get irritated if it doesn't happen. But then you need to look at this because, like I said, free will is everything. Mm. And people must be allowed to outplay their free will, other people. Yeah. So the question is, if you are disturbed by other people's choices, your peace of mind is now dependent on other people. But you want to come to a point where your peace of mind depends only on you and your choices. Yeah. The thing is, as long as you have these reactionary patterns, you can't make free choices. Mm. You're setting yourself up. You may get what you want, but if you don't, you get angry, irritated, down, whatever. Yeah. And I think you're right that a lot of spiritual people feel things are getting worse. Yeah. But that's because you have this idea of what should or shouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, just take the US election, right? Mm-hmm. I said before the election, I thought when Biden and Trump were running, it was two old white men. It wasn't really that exciting of a choice. It was my sense. Yeah. Then Kamala Harris becomes the candidate, and I thought, well, now there's an alternative to the old white men. Mm-hmm. And so I thought America was ready to elect a woman as president, which obviously was wrong. Mm-hmm. But it was because I wanted it to be. So I was disappointed. Yeah. I was surprised. And I spent about, I don't know, a day maybe, wondering how could they not see this? And then I got to a point where I said, but wait a minute. As a spiritual person, I see that the growth in consciousness is the most important. Yeah. And this means people must make choices and see the consequences of their choices. And as a result of that, I am firmly committed to democracy. I believe it's the best form of government because people choose their leaders and then they experience the consequences of what the leader does. So right now, the majority of the people in America chose to elect Trump, I must respect that. Yeah. And once I accept that, I don't have to be disturbed by it.
Yeah, and I see that what's happening is, especially in America, which I feel like America is sort of this, it's a reality TV show now. It's sort of this it's all the world's a stage, and America is the big one right now, right? For the world to see outplay different dynamics. And what's interesting is I see on both sides is they say they love democracy, but they get very upset at democracy when they're not the ones in power, right? They're all, they're reacting and, going into these spirals, and it's sort of funny to me. But I actually knew, because I've been in Canada for a few months, but I'm all my family's in the US, tons of friends in the US. I knew that Trump was going to win for I'd say about 2.5, 3 months. I just had a very strong intuitive sense that I just felt the psychic energy behind his campaign was a lot stronger than Harris. And, I just in all transparency, I would have voted for Harris if they would have sent me my mail-in ballot, but they didn't, so I didn't get to. I certainly wasn't excited to vote for Harris. One of the reasons being is because, I think that the reason why there wasn't as much energy behind her campaign was it was centered around one comment she made when someone asked her, how would your presidency differ from Biden's? And she said, I can't think of anything. And there's millions of people in the United States who are experiencing tremendous financial hardship. You have families who are, what is it? I think there was some statistic like 30 to 40% of families are skipping at least one meal a week or something like that in order to save money. The inflation has taken a huge toll on the economy. It's taken a toll on a lot of economies, not just the United States. And I think people are just very, very sick of the current status quo, and they want change. And you have Trump come in, and he's got all of these people in the periphery who are saying they're going to make America great again. They're going to completely change every aspect of the government. They're going to drain the swamp, all these things. And whether they do it or not isn't really what I'm concerned about. It's just what, people are right now trying to grasp onto any hope that they can, because they feel very tired of the status quo. And, I have friends who have voted for both. I have family who have voted for both, and I have absolutely no judgment towards anyone. But it's a really interesting situation because, people are really, really hungry for change, but they're still trapped in that state of mind that you said, where they don't quite want to take responsibility for themselves. And so they sort of want a powerful person, or they want a government to step in and do it for them. Right. And that's sort of the crux of the issue, I think, with just the world on a political stage.
Yeah, and I think that's correct. I mean, that's why Trump got elected.
Yeah.
And so now all that remains to be seen is whether he can deliver on his promises.
Yeah.
And whether the people who voted for him will learn a lesson if he can't.
Yeah, it's true.
That they'll be more willing to take responsibility.
Yeah, and
I mean, I think one of the big problems in democracy is that there are people who they're always complaining, but they never do anything. But see, the unique thing about a democratic country is that you can do something. You can engage yourself in the process. But there are people in democratic nations, in all democratic nations, but I think there are a lot of them in the US, who are basically acting as if they lived in a totalitarian country where they can't change anything. They can only bitch about it.
Yeah.
My wife was born in Poland, grew up during communism. And most people there were so pacified, they didn't think they could do anything. But they whined and complained and this and that. Yeah. So, I just think that, I was surprised that Trump won as big as he did, and that he won even. But I had the thought that it would probably be a better learning experience if he won.
Right.
Because the worst scenario would be that the election was really, really tight. And then he would come with the election was stolen, there was fraud, and that was the only way he lost. And then all of the people who believed in him, which surprisingly is a lot of people, they would idolize him.
Yeah.
But now, hey, things are going to be what they're going to be. And it could very well be that the ideology fades away because obviously he can't make good on all of his promises.
Yeah. And I know there's going to be people who are listening right now, in the United States, maybe, you voted for Trump and you're saying, and I know exactly what you're saying because I have family who say the same thing. What about, the people that Trump has surrounded himself with? So they point to, a Robert F. Kennedy who's promising to make America healthy. He wants to ban all the food additives and, combat the chronic disease epidemic. And, you have Elon Musk who wants to create government efficiency programs so we stop the waste and all this stuff. And, my brother texted me the other day before the election. He's like, I'm voting for Trump, not because of Trump. I'm voting for Trump because of Elon Musk and because of RFK, and that's why I'm doing it. And I can see why. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on that.
Well, it's again this. If we go back to the black and white thinking, the duality consciousness, there's an aspect of this which I call ideological thinking.
Mm.
And I don't mean this necessarily as an official ideology like communism or whatever, but what I mean is it's a specific form of thinking where you are thinking that in your mind, you can define how the universe should work. Mm. And then you think that once you have defined it, the universe is happily going to comply, and all of the galaxies in the entire universe are going to shift their orbits to align with your vision. Mm. And that's what I see in Trump. That's what I see in Elon Musk. That's what I see in JF Kennedy. That isn't to say that they don't have some right ideas.
Right.
As I said, I don't think one side has all the right ideas and the other has all the wrong ideas. Obviously, there are a lot of things that should be done about many issues. But I'm just saying, when you have this ideological thinking, it becomes black and white because you go for these simple solutions. If we do this, all the problems will be solved.
Yep.
But history has proven that life isn't that simple.
Right.
And I don't want to bring up the H word, but, because Americans always get so offended by it. But here in Europe, we are much more aware of what happened in Germany in the 1930s and from 40 to 45. And we know intuitively that this black and white thinking, it can't solve the problems because problems are not that simple.
Right. Yeah.
So, but again, it just has to play out now.
Yeah.
The election is done and I'm fine. I'm just sitting back and observing.
Yeah.
Neutrally observing what's going to happen and whether people will learn from it or not.
Yeah, and for me, I'm personally holding the vision that I'm pleasantly surprised that maybe some good things come out of it. Who knows? I really don't know, but I'm very curious to see what happens. I'm hoping that people are able to raise their awareness over the next 4 years, and I'm hoping that the Democratic Party as well can see maybe the things that they didn't see in the previous few campaigns, and maybe they can make some shifts. But I want to move on to another subject here in a second. But one thing I've personally had is, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and, I'm trying to fall back asleep. And I don't know if you've ever done this, Kim, but in my mind, I think, well, if I was president, what would I do? How could I fix all the problems of the world? It's not a very healthy pattern, but I've noticed myself do it quite often over the years. And there's a certain intuition that comes to me, when in my mind, oh, I do this and do that and fix all these problems. There's this intuition that comes through and it says, you can't come in and change all these problems in of yourself. That's not the purpose of this planet. The purpose is that people need to collectively raise their awareness so that it becomes self-evident to them that certain things need to change. And that is what is important. Not somebody coming in from the outside, making all these laws, changing all these rules so that they create this golden age on Earth. It's that the average human being raises their awareness and it becomes self-evident that this is the higher path for them to take.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's not very much in America that's self-evident. Okay. But I agree with you 100%. I used to do the same when I was younger, but for many years, I haven't worried about it at all. And the reason for that is, as I said, I see that, and this is a problem that I've seen, and I've seen it in spiritual people, even the Center Master students. They think, because we hear Saint Germain, he has plans for the next 2,000 years, it's going to be a golden age. So we think this means specific outer changes need to happen. But that's not Saint Germain's vision. The vision is the raising of consciousness. That's the main goal. So it is really a matter of what does it take? And that's why also things are getting worse, people say, but they're just becoming more extreme because as the light is accelerating, it's kind of like cycles are becoming shorter. Mm-hmm. And that means that people must express their lack of balance in more extreme ways so they can hopefully see that it's unbalanced. Yeah. In other words, instead of taking a lifetime to realize something, it might only take people a few years to realize that they've gone too far to one side. Yeah. And so I just think that, I look at, if you look at growth, obviously it's like a sine wave of ups and downs. But the general movement of the sine wave is up, it's not horizontal. So it goes in these ups and downs. And that means that there can be periods where you are lower than you were a couple of years ago.
Right.
But you are still going to get the upswing that's going to take you higher. Yeah. So it's just a matter of seeing at a little bit longer perspective. And that's another key to having peace of mind, that you see you take the long view. Yeah. Where you don't get too focused on all of these little details. Oh, this went wrong. Now the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And it isn't. I mean, I sometimes think back, and you can see that at any point in history, there's always been people who thought it's never been worse than it is right now. And they've always been thinking, oh, the end of the world is coming. Jesus is coming back to roll up the world as a scroll, or things are going to fall apart, and this disaster or that disaster is going to happen. But the world has been here for a while. I think it's going to be here for a lot longer. Mm-hmm. I'm not planning to be here for a lot longer on this planet. And the way to get out of this planet is to get over these attachments of what you think should or shouldn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting what you said about the sine wave and the growth, because in my own personal life over the past few years, I experienced that significantly. And a lot of it was really helping me see imbalances in my own state of consciousness. But, even financially in some ways, it's like I had a period where it was just amazing. And we, my wife and I were doing really, really well. And, we even got to a point to where we became millionaires for a little bit. And then, here we go, the downturn. Mm-hmm. And it was a really, really intense challenge. And now I can start to feel the upswing again in that way. But it really brought out so much in my own psychology, feelings of, expectations for how life should be, feelings of failure and inadequacy, compensation games, all that kind of stuff. And what's so funny is, even though outwardly, my current situation is far less abundant, far less the ways that I would have it in my outer mind, I have so much more inner peace, because I use the opportunity I use it as an opportunity to grow and to remove the things that were actually causing the pain, rather than constantly trying to put band-aids on my outer situations. And even right now, we have a house in Arizona that we haven't sold in 6 months. Everyone's shocked about it. I have absolutely no idea how that's happened. We're trying to figure out how to keep 2 houses right now. We might have to, have the bank foreclose on that one, all this crazy stuff, but I'm completely at peace. And I realize, well, what's the importance of all this in the grand scheme of things? The most important thing is that I use every situation as an opportunity for growth, as a springboard for my own self-transcendence. And so if you're listening to this and you have difficulties in your life, this is the opportunity, the very opportunity that you need in order to take the next step. A huge shift came for me when I realized that life was happening for me, not to me. And so I want to use that as an opportunity to foray into the next sort of section of this podcast. And I want to talk about the positive. I want to talk about the constructive and the creative. And I want to talk about, how do we take the challenges that we've faced and use that to discover our divine plan, our purpose for being here. I had someone message me. He emailed me a few weeks ago because he actually listened to our first podcast, and he said it really moved him, and he wanted to try to figure out, how can I how do I find my purpose? How do I find the reason for me being here? Because, he's in his 20s and he went through college, got a degree in something he didn't really end up wanting to do, and he's sort of in that space of openness, but also confusion. And I'm sure you've been through this too. And I'm so curious what your own personal journey was with finding your divine plan, finding your purpose, and finding meaning beyond, all the things we're programmed with.
Oh, I was never confused. Yeah, of course. I mean, you think back when I was a child, I knew I couldn't live a normal life like my parents' generation. I had this newspaper route for 4 years in this nice upper middle class neighborhood. And I was walking around looking at these houses. And these were people who all had college degrees. And I knew I was doing well in school. I could go to college and I could get a job like they had. I could buy a house like that and a car and this and that. And I just knew it wasn't enough, but I didn't know what it was. So then I'm 18 and I find the spiritual path. And then I realized that at least part of my purpose was to walk the spiritual path and raise my consciousness. Because ultimately, and this is the case for many spiritual people I've met. We have in past lives, we have come to a point where we've had enough of these outer worldly things. We know it doesn't satisfy us because you can never have enough money. Look at billionaires. I mean, I watched a television documentary one time about billionaires. And if you listen to what they said, you would come out with the idea that we should feel so sorry for billionaires because their life was just so hard. I mean, they had all this responsibility of what to do with this money and how to avoid losing it and how they had to invest it and this and that. So we should really feel sorry for them. And this proves to me that no matter how much money you have, it's never enough. And you are not going to have peace of mind by outer things. And this is what spiritual teachers have been saying for thousands of years. Nothing in this world is going to ultimately give you peace of mind. And the reason for this is that peace of mind, as I said, is a state of mind. It happens inside yourself. But the only thing that's really going to fulfill you is that oneness with your higher self, with who you are. And I didn't realize that when I was 18, but it took me a while to realize it. But I realized very clearly that my big important part of my purpose was to walk the spiritual path and raise my consciousness. And then this was in 1976 that I discovered the spiritual path. But it wasn't actually until the early 1990s that I realized the difference between the outer path and the inner path, and I really started working on my psychology. So I had about 15 years there where I was, like you said, experimenting with different things. I was pretty serious about it. I moved from Denmark to the United States to follow my spiritual path and so forth. But nevertheless, I didn't really understand the whole thing about psychology. But when I think back, I observed my father. And my father had, he had a very difficult psychology. He was very stubborn. And he decided when he was 10 years old, I'm not going to learn. I don't want to be in school. So he dropped out of school after 7th grade. But his life's dream was to become an engineer traveling the world building bridges. Well, you can't do that with a 7th grade education, right? So that means I could see, even as a child, that he had sabotaged his life's dream at the age of 10. And I decided I'm not going to do that. And I knew that it was his psychology that did it. So therefore, there came a point where I just realized, my goal is to raise my consciousness, but this is only going to happen if I resolve the psychology. And I know this probably doesn't comfort the person who's asking, because what I see in myself and many other people is that the younger we are, the more impatient we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's only when we grow a little older that we maybe become less impatient. Yeah. And but really, if you look at it, here's how I look at this. Before you come into embodiment, you're meeting with your spiritual teachers, if you're a spiritual person, if you reached a certain level. and you are mapping out this divine plan for what you would like to do in your next lifetime. And it has two aspects. One is the personal one. What do you want to experience? What do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? What kind of growth do you want to have in terms of your psychology? And then the other one is, what can you do for the world? What is the gift you want to bring to the world? And when I first heard about the concept of a spiritual life plan or divine plan, it was back in 1984, 85. And I was very focused on what I could do for the world, because I wanted to find out what that was, so I could start doing something important and make a difference. But I couldn't see it. So for several years, I was frustrated. And then in the early 1990s, I realized the reason why I couldn't see my divine plan was that my own psychology was blocking it, because I had these unresolved things in my psychology. And part of the thing I had in my psychology, I'm just giving you as an example, everybody has their own, of course, but I always had this sense that I would do something publicly. I would stand out publicly, speak out, write, this and that. But on the other hand, I was extremely sensitive to being accepted by other people and not being criticized. So if I had become famous at that point, what would have happened to me was what you see in some spiritual people, even some famous people, even some movie stars, is that they can't handle it. It becomes a pressure and they psychologically disintegrate. And the same thing would have happened to me back then. And so in retrospect, I couldn't see what was in my divine plan until I had resolved some critical elements in my psychology. And then, as you said, it became self-evident.
Yeah.
But it didn't mean that I saw my divine plan in one glorious epiphany and I could see, oh yeah, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Because that's not how it works. What you see is, you see intuitively the next step.
Yeah.
Maybe you see a couple of steps ahead, but not very far. And this is a principle that, it's very important to understand on the spiritual path, that you have to start walking. You have to start doing something. Because as long as you're standing still, you're not going to get directions. You will not see where to go next, as long as you're standing still. But when you are moving, then you will get directions. Go in a slightly different direction. Try this, try that. And then gradually, I don't know what my divine plan is for the rest of my life.
But
I'm happy to take one step at a time.
I think that's the fun of it too, is I being surprised. Like,
Yeah.
God is infinitely more creative than our human minds. And I have started shifting into this consciousness of, I am just so excited to see, for it to be uncovered for me, it's like a treasure hunt. Life can become so much more fascinating than planning out every step. And that's what I used to do when I was, so I would have spiritual experiences when I was a teenager, and I would see that I would get premonitions. I saw, I would have two future daughters. I saw what my wife would look like, all these things. And it actually sort of was a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I had a very clear vision of like where I was going. So I didn't compromise. But I also was like, oh, what else do I want? I'm going to create this entire framework of how my life should go. And if it doesn't, I'm going to freak out. And then lo and behold, it didn't happen in the fairy tale vision that I had created for myself. And so that caused me a lot of unnecessary suffering. But one of the things I've recognized recently is I started shifting from my divine plan and my purpose being a thing to being a way of expressing myself. So I started realizing that I actually just wanted to be a flame of love and freedom for other people. I wanted to just interact with people and love them so unconditionally that I give them an experience that they've never had before, and that liberates them. And I'm free to do that in so many different ways. I have a business, I have personal relationships, I have, my relationships with my kids and my wife, all these different things. And they all sort of become vessels for this deeper purpose that I have, which is expressing who I am. And that was a big shift for me when I was reading one of your books, and it came up that your true purpose is to be who you are. You came to experience yourself in schoolroom earth. And that was such a huge shift because I was so programmed by all the self-help gurus and the audio tapes that your purpose is like, go make some money, go do this, achieve, achieve, achieve. And when you're,
Mhm.
8, 9 years old, listening to that, it goes deep into your subconscious mind. And making that shift was like I was seeing the whole world in black and white, and suddenly it was in color. And I think a lot of people can have that same experience. And also, it releases a significant amount of tension because they're no longer trying to live up to this inhuman standard. And instead, they're
Mhm.
just seeking to be more of themselves every day.
Yeah, I've gone through much of the same kind of transformation. In the beginning, I was more concerned about how many people visit my websites, how many people buy the books, will I ever have a bestseller? And now, when I started doing the YouTube videos a year and a half ago, it very quickly I realized that I'm not doing this to convince people of anything. I'm not. I'm not even doing it to change people. I'm not even doing it to help them. I'm actually doing it as a form of self-expression,
Mm,
just expressing who I am.
mm,
And if people are helped by it, that's of course a joy for me. But I'm not attached to the outcome. And this again ties in with free will. That I feel that I started doing this public work that I've been doing in 2002. And since then, I've been doing these conferences, interacting with a lot of people, also been counseling people, and people have asked me questions and this. And in the beginning, I really wanted to help people. So I wanted to see some change in them. But that was in a subtle way projecting something on them that they should change in the way I thought they should change. And now I've just let go of that, where I'm just saying, like you said, all you can really do is express yourself. And one concept that the masters have given us is that we all have a spiritual flame, a spiritual energy. That's our kind of like our base energy. And love is, of course, one of them, but there are 7 spiritual rays. So many people are on a particular ray, or maybe more than one. And so really, we're here to shine the light, to be an open door for shining light into this world, to increase the light so people can see more clearly what's real and unreal.
Can you talk about those rays for those who might not be familiar? Just a brief overview.
Yeah, so Einstein proved in 1905 that everything is made out of energy. I think most people probably realize that. They read about quantum mechanics and this and that. So there is a realm of higher energies called the spiritual realm. And we live in the material world. And in the material world, everything is made out of spiritual energy that has been lowered in vibration. And there are 7 basic types of spiritual energy. There are actually more, but they're the 7 basic ones. They're called the 7 spiritual rays. And they range from the first one, which is the ray of will, determination, power, creativity. The second ray is wisdom, vision. The third ray is love. The fourth is purity or acceleration. The fifth is healing and ambition. And the sixth is peace. The seventh is freedom. So this is just a very short description. You can find a lot more of that on my websites or other spiritual websites. There's a lot to talk about. But basically, you could say, I mean, it's not that there aren't specific changes that will happen, of course. But as spiritual people, we are partly here to be an open door for this spiritual light to shine into this world. And this is, again, because of free will. See, the Ascended Masters have abundant energy, almost unlimited energy. And they could turn on the spotlights on planet Earth and extinguish all darkness instantly. Mm-hmm. But that would violate free will. So the Ascended Masters can't just release their light. They have to release it through somebody in physical embodiment who decides to become an open door, tune into the Masters, tune into their divine plan. And then we can become an open door. We can also invoke the light through invocations, decrees, and other spiritual practices.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you could say part of what we are here for is to increase the light so people can see more clearly.
Yeah. And, I first heard of that teaching, that you have this core spiritual ray that you represent, or maybe a combination of two rays, and I wasn't really that concerned with it. It didn't really speak to me that much. I just thought when I would tune into the different rays, I just loved them all equally. I was like, how can I choose? It's like choosing between a favorite child. But more recently, I started to kind of open my intuition a bit more, and I thought, what really calls me the most? What aspects of God, that the different things the different qualities that you explained, what really pulls me? And what have I also had challenges with? Because my wife has an interesting saying that I think is actually quite true, that your purpose is right up against your pain. Like your greatest purpose is right on the other side of your greatest pain. So whatever we're most hesitant to express, a lot of times that has something to do with what we're actually here to express and create. And I thought, love and freedom are two things that I've always longed for most, but I've always had the hardest time with. And so recently
Mhm.
I started to feel more like, I think that my own personal expression is somewhere in that arena, even though I have a lot of love for the other rays as well, but it's also given me more direction in how I can express myself. So, I'm more focused on how can I set people free to love, or how can I be loving freedom, right? And that brings another dimension of purpose into my life, and with how I'm expressing myself as well. So I think it's quite
That's
a
interesting because when you look at Earth, love is a really difficult concept to deal with on Earth because so much of what people call love is
Mhm.
actually possessive. It's a desire for control. So that's the opposite of freedom that you're talking about.
Mhm.
So when you talk about unconditional love,
Mhm.
well, how can it be unconditional if it's seeking to control people?
Right.
So you are loving people in order to set them free, but in order to do that, you have to be free
Mhm.
in yourself, and means you also have to love yourself. I remember one of the big breakthroughs for me. It was probably over 20 years ago. I just one day I was just I had been doing these decrees to the ascended masters to invoke their light, and this often calmed my mind and cleared my mind. So I received this intuitive insight: you don't accept yourself.
Mm.
It just came to me. The words just came to me inside my head. You don't accept yourself. And it was like a shock to me. And I started thinking about it. And it took me quite some time, months, working with it and asking the masters for clarity. And I realized that I wasn't accepting my right to be who I am and be here on earth and express myself.
Mm.
Because there's always this outer standard. This ties a little bit in with what I said, that I had a sense that my mission was partly public, but I was very afraid of being condemned by people or rejected. Now, we all have a fear of rejection, I think. And so I realized that because I wasn't accepting myself and my right to be who I am, I was looking for acceptance from the outside. And that, of course, was blocking me from freely expressing who I am.
Mm.
So I think it's true. What was it, the saying?
Oh, that your greatest purpose is right up next to your greatest pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think it's true in a sense that in order to express our purpose, we have to overcome the pain,
Yeah.
the thing we fear the most,
Exactly.
because it's the opposite of our purpose,
Right.
in a sense.
Yep.
So I think that's a very good observation, and it's certainly something that people can they can use their intuition to
Yeah.
to see it, but it requires that you're willing to look at yourself. And so you might start by looking at what is your greatest fear, and then maybe you can come to see that your purpose is hiding behind it.
Yeah. And my greatest fear was always being ridiculed and rejected. And I would feel this extraordinary pit in my stomach, in the seat of the soul chakra, which is the center for the seventh ray of freedom. And in my heart, I
That
would feel,
creativity, yeah.
yeah, I would feel that closing. And I experienced that because I grew up, my mom was a successful businesswoman in a network marketing company. And, when I was 18, I decided to join that network marketing company. And thank God I did, because I ended up meeting my future wife. We don't do it anymore. But I remember I was 18. I was very enthusiastic. I had been in the spiritual teaching since I was 13 or 14. And so I had a lot of wisdom, and I would express that. And, people would ridicule me, or they would be sort of condescending because I was so young. And that really, really, it just hit me right in the gut so hard. And I felt this tremendous rejection because I just wanted to be seen as a human, not as, a kid. Right. And,
Hmm.
and that caused me
I
to go,
recognize that.
yeah, yeah, and it sent me on a downward spiral for years because I was so afraid to express who I truly am for fear of being
Hmm.
rejected or ridiculed or looked down upon or, and starting to be free of that is such a liberation. And so if you're
Hmm.
listening to this, you know, it's I we're all on our own journey, so you can't force it. However, it is so valuable to start to question those things that we're so afraid to question and to look at, because really on the other side of that is such a tremendous sense of freedom. I was in, I was a Kriya yogi at one point, and I was kind of in those Eastern teachings for a while. And, they always talk about the concept of surrender, letting things go, giving it to God. And it came to me that really what we're surrendering is our fear and our anxiety and our pain and our suffering. The ego likes to frame it as if we're truly losing something that's so valuable, but we're not.
Hmm.
We're losing all of the things that cause us the most amount of suffering. We're surrendering that to a greater presence. And it's so liberating.
Well, the ego is losing the very thing they are using to control you.
Yep.
You are not losing, you are being liberated.
Yep.
I think, incidentally, many spiritual people can recognize what you are talking about because um, most spiritual people, we are spiritual because in past lifetimes we have raised our consciousness
Mm-hmm.
beyond what most people in our family have. So most spiritual people are more aware than their parents, their siblings, and other people. And we want to express that. But when we do, we are often hammered down. And so I would say that if you recognize that in yourself, I would recommend you go on my YouTube channel. I have a whole playlist called The Avatar Psychology. And I talk about it in there that many spiritual people have come to help improve planet Earth, but we were often very brutally put down in past lifetimes. And that created this reactionary pattern you're talking about. We are so afraid of rejection that it prevents us from doing what we are here for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a big topic, and I have a number of videos on it. But if people feel this is interesting to them, watch that and see how that resonates with you.
Yeah, I've watched all those videos and I did your Avatar books, the series. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, nothing has helped me spiritually grow more than that. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was hard. It was like running an Ironman 5 times over. It was extremely difficult. There were a lot of things I did not want to look at, a lot of unpacking, a lot of clearing out the dirty laundry and, but it was so worth it. I mean, there were moments where I'd be working on something, and I know in the book you recommend, you stay on the same chapter for, you know, oh gosh, I don't know, months at a time or something. You're really
33 days,
30,
yeah.
33 days. I'm a bit ADD, so it doesn't really work for me. After about the third day, my brain just, So I did them consecutively one after another. So it was kind of this,
Mm-hmm.
progression. But I remember I'd go through it once, okay, go through it twice, and then, maybe the third time I would land on something, and all of a sudden in the middle of an invocation, aha, something just shifted. And I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I had removed 100-pound weighted vest that was sitting on my chest for my entire life. And then I
Yeah.
was just like, oh my God. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a liberation. And I mean, I can't recommend it enough. I mean, there are so many people who are walking around with so much baggage, and they have no idea if they got to glimpse for a moment what life would be like outside of that perception filter, they would
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't rest until they were free of it completely.
Yeah.
So,
No, and I used a metaphor often that uh, climbing a spiritual path is like walking up a mountain. But many spiritual people, they are just focusing on the top of the mountain and they are trying to drag themselves up there.
mhm.
But they don't realize that you have a number of boat anchors dragging behind you in a rope. So it's so much harder to climb the mountain because of all this weight you're dragging along. But if you would just stop, look inside your psychology and see, oh, here's a rope, let me cut it. And then you keep cutting ropes. And for every time you cut a rope, it becomes easier to climb. And once you lock into that, instead of resisting looking at the psychology, you begin to become eager to do it.
Yeah.
And I recognize fully when I first started, this was back in the 1990s, when I started saying, okay, I'm going to do something about mythology. I went to various forms of therapy, but there was tremendous resistance from me to do this. And I see this in many spiritual people. And it's partly because we are afraid of what's going to be stirred up. We are afraid of what if we discover something really bad about ourselves? But once you get past that resistance, it becomes a self-reinforcing process because you realize you are losing weight every time you look at something.
Yep.
And then so this is a big pitfall, that, and this is what I talk about with the outer path, where there are spiritual movements, there are spiritual gurus that will promise you. You sit at the feet of the guru, you perform the spiritual practice, and one day, poof, you're going to be enlightened. It just doesn't happen that way. This is the outer path. The inner path is you look at the psychology, deal with that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Let's not go into that. But the real, so this is the one pitfall. The other pitfall that I see spiritual people go into is maybe they have worked on their psychology, maybe they have been on the path for a while, maybe they have practiced, and suddenly they have what some people call an awakening experience. And it can be a very dramatic, I'm not trying to knock it, I've had the experiences myself, but they think now I'm awakened, I'm enlightened, I don't need to look at my psychology anymore. But then if you don't look, you're not going to progress beyond that point for the rest of your lifetime. And I even see people who had these kind of experiences, then they set themselves up as spiritual teachers. And now they claim they're awakened, meaning they've got no ego anymore, but they're still behaving like people who have egos, right? And so there becomes this very dysfunctional attitude. And this is what you see in some cults, where they have this idolatry of the guru. So what I'm saying is the first pitfall is you think you can become enlightened without looking at the psychology. Then you come to a point where you think you've done enough looking at the psychology. Now you don't need to do it. Mm-hmm. But I have realized and made peace with the fact that I'll be looking at my psychology as long as I'm in embodiment.
Yeah. I wish
it just doesn't end.
I wish it was that easy that we could have a peak spiritual experience and maintain that and, just keep going. But that's not what the Earth School is for. It's.
No, but you see, I mean, this is again this. If you think about free will, right? Mm-hmm. We have been given free will. And that means we need to experiment with our free will until we have had enough of certain experience. So one experience we can have on Earth, which is very prominent on Earth, is we can go into this duality consciousness, the black and white thinking, the thinking there's right and wrong, what I call the epic mindset. There's some epic cause we have to fulfill, and then everything will be wonderful. Everybody has to be converted to being Christians. Everybody has to be followers of Yogananda and practice Kriya Yoga, or transcendental meditation, or decrees to the ascended masters, or whatever it is, And so this is, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have a right to experiment with that. But there comes a point where you have to realize that if you feel that you have had enough of this, then the spiritual path becomes about overcoming what the Buddha called attachments to doing something, doing that. And what can happen to some people is that they come to a point where they've had enough of all the suffering, all the human nonsense. Now they see the spiritual path, they hear that you can become enlightened. And maybe they see this guru is supposedly enlightened. And then they say, I want that too. And I want it in 5 minutes. I mean, here's my credit card. Just charge me whatever you want, but I expect you to deliver in 5 minutes, right? Yeah. But you see, it's like I say, when you go into duality, it's like going into a labyrinth, a maze. So there are all these walls, you can't see anything, but you come to a point where the forks, and you choose to go in one direction. Then you go another direction. This is what you have done in past lifetimes by creating all these subconscious selves. But the purpose of this is learning something about who you are and who you're not, right? So now you are in this maze. And in order to be free from Earth, you have to go back into the maze.
Mm-hmm.
But there's only one way to do it, to retrace your steps. And every decision you made that brought you deeper into the maze, you have to come to see it, undo it consciously, because you learn both from making the decision and from undoing the decision. But what happens to many people is they're still deep in the maze. But now they're saying, I've discovered the spiritual path, there's this enlightened guru. I want to get out of the maze right now. I want to jump out of the maze. But that isn't the purpose.
Yeah.
The purpose is to go in and sometimes we're not conscious of what we're doing as we're going in. So you go in unconsciously, but you go out consciously. That's how you grow.
Yeah.
And that's what the vast majority of spiritual people haven't gotten. And sadly, the vast majority of those who call themselves spiritual teachers haven't gotten that either,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a sad fact.
That's so true.
So they're all looking for this shortcut. They're all looking for this easy way out.
Yeah. Because
I remember in transcendental meditation, when the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi started the movement back in the 1950s, he promised people, meditation was you meditated 20 minutes morning and evening. Pretty easy to do, not really that demanding, right? But he promised that TM was such a powerful technique that if you meditated every morning and evening for 20 minutes, after 8 years, you would have reached cosmic consciousness. And many people believed this, and they were very faithful in meditation. But then the clock ticks, right? And all of a sudden, 8 years has gone, and there's a person saying, hey, wait a minute, Maharishi, I meditated for 8 years. I'm not in cosmic consciousness. I'm still suffering. What's the deal? Well, the deal is that there is no automatic path. You have to retrace your steps in the maze.
Yeah.
You think you can get beyond it? I've seen people who thought, oh, maybe this applies to other people, it doesn't apply to me. I can get around it. Yeah. Fine. If you want that experience, you don't need me.
Yeah.
I can't help you.
I was one of those people. I remember there was a certain point I had used teachings to block myself in, and then I had to ask myself, I'm listening to these teachings. Am I actually applying them to me? Because I would hear the masters say something about a certain thing, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm sure there's people that could resonate with. I'm sure there's people that could help. But for some reason in my mind, it didn't. There was something blocking it, and I finally got the awareness to question it. And in retrospect, it's hilarious to think that there were so many things that could have helped me, but I was like, oh yeah, I'm sure that's good for someone else. I think I got that down, but I didn't.
Yeah. But we all do that in the beginning. That's again this phase. And part of it is you're not ready to look at something until you come to a certain point. And so this is another reason why I'm saying with your divine plan, you don't see it all at once, you see it step by step. And it's the same thing getting out of the maze. You have to take one thing at a time. Because I remember back also, I had much of the same sense. I thought, I'm an advanced student. I'm really eager. I'm willing to work. I'm willing to do this and that. So I should have quick results. And it took me some years where I had to realize that you just can't do it all at once. You can only do one thing at a time. And you need to focus on what's your next challenge? What's the next step? 10 steps ahead doesn't matter. What is my next step? And then you keep taking that next step and not allow yourself to stop. Because I can see, for example, you're talking about this thing with the avatars and the idea that we have this trauma that we received when we first came to Earth. Well, I wasn't ready to deal with that when I was 20 or 30 or 40. I had to work through other things in my psychology before I was able to go that deep and look at this. And I think we all have a process to go through. And that's why it's important to have a certain, Jesus said, in your patience possess ye your souls. Because being too impatient is really going to sabotage you. You're looking for this quick result, the ultimate. And it's something we have to realize as well, is that the ego is born out of this duality consciousness, right? And the duality consciousness has the two polarities. And in reality, they are relative. They're not absolute. They're relative because they're defined in relation to each other, good and bad, true and false. So none of them are ultimate. But the ego presents it as one of them is ultimate, ultimately good, the other is ultimately bad. Mm-hmm. And so the ego is always looking for something ultimate.
Yeah.
The ultimate guru, the ultimate spiritual practice, the ultimate teaching. There should be a teaching where I read it and it just clicks and I'm instantly enlightened.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is fed by some spiritual teachers out there who claim that they were instantly enlightened. Mm-hmm. And maybe they were in this lifetime. But that's because they did something in past lifetimes that they don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah, patience has always been my most difficult challenge. And I think a lot of spiritual people as well. Maybe just young people.
I think all of us.
Yeah.
All of us have it.
I especially in this day and age where everything's instant gratification, ADHD and ADD, everyone has it. Everyone I know has it. It's not that special of a thing anymore, because we're all so addicted to the dopamine spirals and we're all so stimulated. But yeah, I think that one of the biggest shifts that you could make is truly embracing this journey in this world, in this life. And you can actually make swifter progress by being in the present moment, by honoring each step up rather than trying to take the shortcut. And that's one thing that I did is, I would have visions of past lives and I thought I always wanted to be special. So I had this thing in this subconscious self that always wanted to be special. And, I thought, oh, well, if I had this lifetime or I might have been this special person, I don't really need to I don't need to go into the mud like everybody else. I'm so the ego is so great. I'm just going to transcend myself, have some big spiritual experiences, and voila, I'll remember everything. But that's not how it is, and I think that humility is one of the most important characteristics we can have in the path. And just take and it's so funny, and we'll wrap this up soon. I know I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I remember this realization I had where I actually asked myself, I think I was reading one of your books, and this spontaneous thought came to my mind, and it was, what if I'm not as advanced as I think I am? And actually, in that moment, I felt so much relief when that thought popped into my head. And the first few times it happened, I was like, why am I feeling relief? Shouldn't this be, something that I reject? But it struck a chord deep within me. And it was this tension that I was holding, trying to be perfect, trying to live up to a certain standard, trying to be special. And as I've slowly started to let it go, I'm sure there's aspects of that I haven't let go of, but it's just been this ease that has sort of like flown into my everyday experience and my spiritual path. And I think that, a lot of people who are spiritual students are just holding so much tension, trying to be special, trying to be important, trying to, uphold this image, when in reality, we just need to let the image go.
Well, what I'm talking about with the duality consciousness, right? We are using this duality consciousness to build a self-image, a sense of self, a sense of identity in relation to the world. And remember what I said about the ego wanting something ultimate, right? So you have to be ultimately special in relation to this world, more special than other people. But wait a minute, how many people are we on the planet right now? 8 billion, who also all want to be special. Can we all be special? So what happens is that this desire to be special becomes a mental prison. Yeah. Because you are constantly evaluating everything you do, everything you think, everything you say, according to this standard. Mm-hmm. What makes you special? Or what could something happen that means you're not special? And it's just a mental prison. It's a constant strain. And of course, it's a relief to let it go. And that's why I'm saying, once you get that, once you realize that the spiritual path is not about attaining certain outer results here on earth, it's about becoming free of earth. Mm-hmm. In other words, the goal of the path is not to achieve the result that your ego thinks you should receive, so you are this special spiritual student. The goal of the path is to become free of the desire to be special or not special here on earth.
Mm.
That's the whole purpose. That's how you can leave.
Yeah.
And again, if people aren't ready to leave, that's fine. But you have to ask yourself at one point, if I have a divine plan, if I have a gift to bring to earth, and if my unresolved psychology is preventing me from bringing that gift, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Do I want to keep pursuing the goals defined by this ego, this unresolved psychology, seeking to be special? Or do I want to overcome it so I can give the gift I'm here to give and just be who I am and express my light and whatever else is in your divine plan? And before I started this mission I have been on since 2002, I had this experience of literally seeing the vanity of my outer self, my ego and its ambitions, its desire to be special. Seeing it, and I felt that in the deepest recesses of my being, I just let it go, and it just lifted from me. And that's when, as I've described before, I was contacted by the Ascended Masters and asked if I wanted to do something for them instead of pursuing personal goals. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And I'm not trying to say that to make myself special, because many other people have the same. We all have our individual missions, and none of them are more important than others. So the question is, how do we come to find our real mission in life? And it requires that we surrender, let go of this outer vision. But we can't really do that until we see these, as I call the subconscious selves, the reactionary patterns, where we think, oh, this is so important for me.
Yeah.
What is more important to you? To be seen a certain way or to achieve certain results in the world, or to connect to your divine plan and your higher self and give a service that's beyond what you can see with the outer mind?
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful, Kim. Well, wow, I think that this podcast has had a lot of really interesting topics come up. I think that people are going to find a lot of value from it. So I really appreciate you coming on. I have one more question for you. Actually, I have two little questions. One is slightly personal, but I'm going to say it anyways because maybe it'll help somebody. I'm sure it'll help me. And then another one is kind of the closing question. So I think a lot of people have the habit, myself included, of talking about, oh yeah, that stuff I used to have, those challenges I used to face, but I've overcome them. So everyone's sort of talking that past tense, and it's, sometimes it can kind of project this image of perfection, right? Oh yeah, I've dealt with all these things, but I'm not going to talk about what I'm actually going through. So, but one thing that I've been going through recently is, I've overcome a lot of separate selves, but I still have these separate selves that react really intensely when I'm, focused on something and when there's chaos around me, right? So maybe I've had a really powerful meditation or an invocation, or I'm reading an inspiring book, and I put that down and I'm feeling in an uplifted state, and then I get around other people, and as soon as they start bringing their inharmonious vibrations, or the kids are screaming, pulling each other's hair, I lose my inner peace. I lose, and I get testy, I get irritable, I react, I snap at people. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that yourself, but if you have, and if you've managed to overcome any aspect of it,
Oh, I don't think I was ever irritated in my whole life.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Even when I had two small children in diapers, I don't think I ever lost my cool.
Yeah. Well, this morning
Yeah,
I'm
of
reading.
course I have.
Yeah.
And I still experience it. Every
Yeah.
once in a while, I snap over something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was your question about it?
Oh, well, so what, I'm trying to figure out the subconscious mechanism behind it. This morning I'm reading a book. I was rereading the I Am discourses. I just felt an inner intuition to do that. There are some things I've realized from it. And I read this really inspiring passage, and my eyes are closed and I'm just really feeling it. And all of a sudden this pterodactyl like screech comes from behind me, and the kids start fighting. And I turn around and I raise my voice, "Stop that." And my wife's looking at me and she's like, "Oh, Mr. Enlightened, you need to chill out." And I'd love to overcome this. So if you have any advice for that, I would love anything you might have to say about that to help me overcome that.
Well, the way I look at these situations is two ways. First of all, the reaction always comes from one of these selves.
Mm-hmm.
And the self is always based on some kind of belief.
Mm-hmm.
And I can recognize this, when I was more new on the spiritual path, I felt it was so important to do my spiritual practice or study books. Mm. And I can see, so I always got irritated if the kids pulled me out of it or other people. But what I still see in myself, and I haven't resolved it, is that I'm still getting focused in my own mind and my internal process of trying to understand some spiritual truth. Mm. And I don't want to be disturbed by outer things, because it's still so internally focused, and that it's important for me to go through this process. Mm. So this is part of it. I haven't really resolved that yet. It's something I actually started working on, but I think part of it is this, that we still have this division between a spiritual activity and a worldly activity.
Right.
And what we have to overcome is that everything is part of our spiritual path and our growth. Mm. There is no division between spiritual and worldly.
Right.
Dealing with practical things in life, including when you have small children, is part of your spiritual activity.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just have to say, well, I don't have time to read a spiritual book.
Yeah.
I just don't have time. I mean, I remember having small children, and I was still doing certain things, but very rarely I had time to sit and read a book. So part of it is this division and the expectation of it. But I think part of it's also that I'm beginning to see that I still have this, and it must be a self, even though I would say it more of an attitude, but it must be a self, that it's so important for me to figure out how the world works and how everything works, to figure it out with my mind. Mm-hmm. And I am beginning to realize that there are some things that you just can't figure out. You can't figure everything out, because everything doesn't have a rational, logical explanation that can be expressed in words.
Right.
So it's partly that. But I've also come to a point where I have a little more forbearance with myself. In other words, it's like if I see a pattern, if I get irritated over the same thing several times, then I say, okay, I'll look for the self behind it. But I'm also realizing, Earth is a heavy planet. It's a difficult planet. The collective consciousness that we talked about, it's always impinging upon you. So if you get irritated once in a while, is it the end of the world? No. Does it prove you're not enlightened? So in other words, I've learned to sometimes, because you see, what I used to do much more is I used to think I had to be perfect, right? Other people might get irritated, but I couldn't allow myself to do that. So when I did, I would have to go in and analyze it and try to figure out why. And I would try to explain why maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. And so first I got irritated, then I was spending time and energy on dealing with it. And now I'm come more to the point where I say, okay, so what? It happened. Move on. Let's move on. Leave it behind. So what? Mm-hmm. Don't have to figure everything out. I don't have to explain everything. Sometimes, this old bumper sticker, SHIT happens.
Yeah.
You always have to put it into some cosmological context of unresolved psychology or this or that,
Right. Yeah. Good. I like that. That's a good response. I'll try
now,
to think.
This shouldn't be an excuse for not looking at unresolved psychology, but I just think this is the wonderful thing about the spiritual path. Because what did we start talking about? We started talking about black and white thinking, right? And in black and white thinking, you always want to think, oh, there's this easy solution. It's
Yeah.
either this or that. But when you become more mature in the path, you come to realize the ego can pervert everything and take everything too far. So the ego can, on the other hand, deny, oh, you don't need to look at your psychology, just meditate and you will be there. But the ego can also turn looking at your psychology into a never-ending process of analyzing. So you've got to find some kind of balance. Sometimes you swing to the one side, sometimes you swing to the other, and you just have to go back and find some. You were talking earlier about humility. Mm-hmm. I would actually say neutrality, being in a neutral state of mind. You're neither proud nor humble. You're just neutral.
Yeah.
And so that's what I strive more for. And so I realize sometimes I get irritated. Okay, so I'm not neutral. But instead of analyzing, let me just return to neutral.
Right. That's very valuable. Thank you. Well, the last question I have for you, Kim, is a short one, and it is the Ananda podcast. The name, the word Ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss. And so my question for you is, what does following your bliss mean to you?
Well, I mean, the way the question is usually understood is, I would say it's being myself and expressing who I am. But I would also question the word bliss, because what do people mean with bliss?
I knew you would.
Well, I just think that Ananda was the word used by the Buddha.
Yeah.
That I assume it's Pali, right? From the Pali language, instead of Sanskrit.
Actually, I'm not sure.
Because the Buddha spoke in Pali.
Okay.
But anyway, so I think it had a different meaning to the Buddha.
Okay.
And it, as far as I remember, it wasn't translated to English until I think it was the 1950s, at least in the 1900s. And I think there was some English dude who he wasn't necessarily at the Buddha level of consciousness, and he had to find some kind of English word. And happiness, he thought, that's not really covering it, so he came up with this bliss. And I just don't think it's the way most people see it. I think in the West they say, oh yeah, we know what happiness is, and bliss is just happiness on steroids. And I don't think that's what the Buddha meant, because I think what the Buddha meant was the neutral state of mind, where you're not pulled in either direction. You're not seeing through the filter of duality. You're neutral.
Very insightful. Beautiful. Well, thank you, my friend, Kim Michaels, everybody. I hope you found this podcast as fun, as interesting and enlightening as I did. Kim, do you have any websites or content you'd like to direct people to before we close?
Well, just go on YouTube and search on Kim Michaels. I have a channel with, I think there's 370 videos on there. So see if there's something that interests you.
Amazing.
And on some of my YouTube videos, in the end, there's a link to my podcast, or not my podcast, my websites.
And they are very good websites. I've spent many hours on them myself. So I appreciate you, Kim. Thanks again. And thank you for listening, everybody.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on.